Before diving into today's video, we have a very important announcement to make. As you know, we've been partnered with Gsupps for over a year now, and I'm excited to reveal our very own waifu cup featuring Mara. Huh? You like it, fellas? Put a lot of work into this, I'm just saying. Now, before you jump up and say, Cross, what the hell, man? Listen, here's the thing. I've just been asking for one thing and one thing only during this 6-month-long season, for Mara to get into this dang hot tub. And she never did. Not even once. Now though, with this Gsupps cup, you can have her get in the hot tub anytime you want. And you can try some of our favorite beverages alongside it. Things like Emotional Damage, Blowhole Blast. All of them taste phenomenal and will taste even better in this cup. We're also launching a Mousepad and a t-shirt, so you can enjoy Mara even while the helmet is on. All of these items are only available for a limited time, and I mean very limited. You can pre-order now over on Gsupps website using our link in the description below, and using code Aztecross will get you 10% off your entire purchase. If this waifu cup does well, fellas, we're gonna get our own custom flavor. Huge thanks to Gsupps for making this drop happen. Today, we are finally looking at our Titan exotic armor pieces that are coming in the final shape. This includes the much anticipated Hazardous Propulsion chest piece, which is actually the one we got a trailer on just a few weeks ago. You know, the one that shoots mini rockets. Our other exotic that we're also going to be reviewing is called Wishful Ignorance. This is one that ties directly into our strand melees, and it's even got that hom card look to it. But let's start with Hazardous Propulsion. It comes with the exotic perk Danger Close, which reads, weapon precision hits or final blows have a chance to load a kinetic Exodus rocket. Activating your class ability fires loaded Exodus rockets. Damaging targets with Exodus rockets temporarily increases the damage you deal with all other rockets. Now, I know, there's quite a lot going on here, which is why I want to break this down into sections. First up, weapon precision hits or final blows have a chance to load a kinetic Exodus rocket. And you're going to see on the left-hand side of your screen the buff Exodus rockets with 6 boxes underneath it. And that's how many rockets you can load in total. Now, it seems like every precision kill I got would load 1 rocket, and most final blows would load a rocket, and then a precision hit seems to be pretty random. Sometimes it would only take 2 precision hits, sometimes it would take 5 or 6 precision hits. There was even one time where it doubled up and a precision kill counted for 2. Overall, it wasn't difficult at all to get 6 rockets loaded. Now, once you have as many rockets loaded as you want, you can use your class ability, and this will then launch those rockets. This works with both towering and rally barricades, as well as the thruster ability. All of them will emit those Exodus rockets. Now, against Carl, this was dealing 28,950 damage per Exodus rocket, which would net us 173,700 total damage if you land all 6. Now, let me just say these rockets are insanely fast. We're talking just under 2 seconds from the moment we cast our ability to our final rocket damage number showing up. Now, the last part of the exotic perk is what truly makes this exotic amazing. You see, damaging targets with Exodus rockets temporarily increases the damage you deal with all other rockets. Now, you'll see a new buff on the left-hand side of your screen, which says enhanced rockets times however many Exodus rockets hit a target. This will of course max out at 6 stacks, and then a timer which lasts for 10 seconds. Now, the amount of stacks you have directly correlates to how big the damage buff is for your rockets. And yes, as you're seeing on the screen here, this does in fact buff rocket sidearms. This is literally us using the strand rocket sidearm, the call, and it's getting a buff. And I know you're like, Cross, but that's a sidearm. I know, but it's a rocket assisted frame sidearm, which in Destiny, at least for this particular exotic, counts as a rocket. Now, from our testing here at Carl, ×1 is a 10% increase in rocket damage, ×2 is 17%, ×3 is 24%, ×4 is 30%, ×5 is 33%, and finally, ×6 maxes out our damage at 35%. Guys, that's 35% increased rocket damage. Now, keep in mind, this also works with normal legendary rockets, as well as our exotics. I tested this with Dragon's Breath. And the beautiful thing is, not only was it increasing our direct impact and explosion damage, but it was also increasing our ignition damage. And that's something we don't see often, is that the ignition damage, which is normally separate for a lot of different weapons, that is also getting buffed here. Now, granted, we had limited time to test everything, and unfortunately, I didn't hit everything on the list, but I would assume that it's gonna work with things like damage perks on weapons, such as bait and switch, explosive light, etc. The other thing we didn't get to test is if this increases wolfpack rounds, or most notably, if someone is firing Gallahorn shots into an enemy and you're using a legendary rocket, does that 35% scale everything? I would assume so, guys, considering our ignition damage on Dragon's Breath also scaled. So I would think that that 35% damage buff, if it's tagging to you after you release those rockets, then whatever damage, whether it's Wolfpack rounds or damage perked on your rocket, all of these things should be netting you benefits. But there is a lot of things we need to test next week when we get this exotic. I'm curious about things like Quicksilver Storm, considering it ejects rockets when you're firing this weapon and it's loading you those grenade launcher shots. The origin traits, nanotech tracer rockets. Does this also apply? And before you think we're crazy to wonder about these things, understand a rocket sidearm, which in the game is literally labeled a sidearm, is able to get this buff. Let me just say, by the way, that strand sidearm, it cooks, man. Don't worry. We'll be going over random rolls on all these weapons very soon. Now, final notes. This exotic does work inside of PvP. Now, at least from the brief moment that I used it, the damage isn't significant. We're talking 28 damage per rocket. That means even if you had all 6 rockets, which would net you 168 damage, this of course isn't enough to get a kill, but it does grant you the damage buff. I was using the Call sidearm, and this cranked our damage up to 110 per body from 2 stacks, which seems to be around a 14% increase. So PvP damage may be a little less, and again, next week, we'll be testing this more extensively. But I will say PvP is kind of a difficult place to gauge numbers accurately, considering how things round here. Either way, Hazardous Propulsion works here inside of PvP as well. Overall, guys, this is a very spicy exotic, arguably the best out of all the new exotics launching in the final shape. I mean, we're talking 35% increase in rocket damage. And depending on what the raid bosses are going to be, grenade launchers have really taken top slots in terms of DPS for so many raid rotations, but we cannot overlook the potential that a couple titans rocking Hazardous Propulsion could have, bringing rocket launchers into the day 1 raid. Having that 35% buff, buffing not only your rockets, but also those rocket sidearms, whether it's Indebted Kindness or even the new sidearms, which by the way, we're supposed to be getting a solar rocket assisted sidearm, that is going to pair beautifully with Hazardous Propulsion. Now on to our next exotic. We have Wishful Ignorance here. Now this exotic is literally made for Strand, but it may have some use for Prismatic as well. This comes with the exotic perk Wish Dragon's Talents, which reads, you gain an additional Frenzy Blade charge. Frenzy Blade in Fletch's Storm briefly increases their damage with each strike. Pulses from your Banner of War return melee energy based on the number of allies healed. Now I don't want to give me lore spoilers here, but considering what just went down with Riven, the unintentional wish by Crow, the fact that this thing is literally called Wishful Ignorance, it's screaming Hobcar lore. Now overall, this exotic is pretty straightforward. You get an additional melee charge, which brings you up to 4 total, which for something like Fletch's Storm, this allows us to put out 7 melees in total, compared to the max of 5 that we're able to do in our current sandbox. Now you also get a damage buff with Frenzy Blade and Fletch's Storm briefly after each strike. And this stacks up to 3 times. Against Carl at base, Fletch's Storm deals 8,251 damage per projectile, which goes off 4 times. At Wish Dragon's Talent times 1, this goes up to 9,076 damage per projectile, netting us a 10% increase. At times 2, it jumps up to 10,314 damage per projectile for a 25% increase. And then at times 3, it maxes out at 12,377 damage per projectile, which is a whopping 50% increase in damage. A quick side note, this also increases our unravel damage that Fletch's Storm outputs as well. Now this stacks with Banner of War. At times 1, we're dealing 12,707 damage per projectile for a 54% increase in damage. Then at times 2, it goes up to 14,439 damage, which is a 75% increase. And then at times 3, it goes up to 17,327 damage for a 110% increase to our Fletch's Storm projectiles. Unfortunately, I didn't get to test out the last part of this exotic, where Banner of War pulses return melee energy based on the number of allies healed, mainly because I was playing solo outside of the few PvP games that we played with it. Now I mainly tested out this exotic with Fletch's Storm. I didn't get to try it with just the Frenzy Blade melee, but upon talking with Fallout, it looks like at 1 stack, this is a 20% damage buff. 2 stacks is a 50% damage buff, and 3 stacks is a 100% damage buff to our Frenzy Blade melee. Big shout out to Fallout for allowing us to use this gameplay right here, as we completely forgot to test out Frenzy Blade. Now, a few things to note. This damage buff falls off after about 2.5 seconds of not dealing melee damage, unlike Gsupps and Wormgod Caress, which have timers on them. So this exotic is really only meant to be used when you have full melee charges, and really only when you have 4 melee charges. We also need to talk about the nerfs that are happening to Gsupps as well as Wormgod's Caress when paired with Banner of War. Now for Gsupps, Bungie is reducing the amount of time that bionic enhancements lingers after no longer being surrounded from 8 seconds to 5 seconds. This duration is now visible as a timer on the buff. Then Banner of War is getting its own nerfs, which of course a lot of us are using with Syntheseps and Wormgod. First up, the maximum timer is being reduced from 30 seconds to 24 seconds. And now when you use Syntheseps paired with Banner of War, your melee bonuses decrease from 1.4 times to 1.15, your glaive melee bonuses decrease from 1.25 to 1.125, and your super bonus has been decreased from 1.4 to 1.2. Subsequently, Wormgod's pairing with Banner of War is getting its bonus decreased from 1.4 to 1.1 based on stat counts, and its glaive melee bonus is dropping from 1.4 to 1.05 based on the stat count. Now this is a big nerf to these exotics only when paired with Banner of War. But understand guys, this is just reducing the Banner of War bonus damage paired with these exotics. Syntheseps is still keeping its 165% increase in melee damage, as well as its 100% increase in glaive melee damage and its 50% increase in super damage, which is still higher than that of Wishful Ignorance. Now personally guys, I've already been rocking Wormgod Caress more than Syntheseps for the past few months. It's just too good. And after this change to biotic enhancements and that lingering damage buff being reduced, I'm probably going to be maining Wormgod Caress, which keep in mind, at max stacks, it deals 275% increase melee damage. 275! That's substantially better than the 100% here from Wishful Ignorance. It also has other benefits like 200% increased glaive melee damage, 35% increased weapon damage, all of which outpaces Wishful Ignorance. Now, this is not me saying I'm writing Wishful Ignorance off completely, because we only have to play with it for a short amount of time. I think the biggest selling point to Wishful Ignorance is going to be when you have a team of Banner of War Titans rocking this exotic together, because it's that last part of the exotic trait that's so important. You see, depending on how much health you heal your allies with Banner of War, this will return melee energy. Now, of course, I'm playing solo here, so I couldn't test this, but if this is giving us our melee back, I think the idea with Wishful Ignorance is that it's just going to be an exotic that allows you to spam melee after melee. For instance, Frenzy Blade by itself gets an escalating regeneration rate depending on how many charges you have. We'll be testing this more, but there's a chance that this regeneration rate gets even further increased by the 4th charge. So whatever that amount of energy is that we get back with Banner of War, that's really going to be the deciding factor of where Wishful Ignorance sits. Personally, I think most Titans are going to continue rocking Wormgod Caress with Frenzy Blade. What Wishful Ignorance really serves for me is that combat loop that we had months ago when ACD feedback was allowing us to spam our Fletchet melees over and over. I almost feel like Bungie saw that and was like, yo, let's just make that an exotic, of which they've done here. Now, I know a lot of the focus when it comes to Prismatic is going to be on those exotic class items. However, keep in mind with Prismatic, we could still be using exotics in their normal forms with Prismatic. And yes, Wishful Ignorance could be utilized on Prismatic with just our Frenzy Blade melee. This could get us up to 4 melee charges. And I wish I would have thought about this while I was playing with this, but we could utilize it with things like the Consecration aspect, which would allow us to have 4 back-to-back Consecration slams in a row. And keep in mind, Consecration is getting another buff in the final shape. Its slam attack will now shatter stasis crystals. Ignitions generated by Consecration now deal 20% additional damage to PvE combatants. And they fixed an issue where Consecration's slam attack was sometimes unable to damage floating combatants while they were grounded. Now, the main reason why I'm bringing all this up is because I want to see the potential synergy with Wishful Ignorance. Could it synergize? Is there going to be some weird overlap here with Consecration? That's definitely something we'll be testing immediately in the final shape. So guys, let me know in the comments below what you think. If you haven't checked out our other videos, we have covered literally everything from exotics to prismatic. We'll continue covering everything throughout this week. I'm excited to get into final shape with you guys next week though, and truly start kitting out builds with all of these. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.
We'll be right back.